Always a pleasure having you. Thank you for staying with us. It's time now for the news review. We dig into the papers and more. But let me say a very good morning to the fantastic, I want to use some adjectives, but I'm being cautious. Media consultant Liz Hayford-Asari is our guest. She's shaking her head at me. Good morning, Liz.
Good morning.
I'm incorrigible, eh?
Very, and I don't think I'm fantastic yet.
Well, in any case, I think you are. But thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so let's get into the papers. Later on, I'll share some thoughts with you on some of the major topics we have lined up for discussion today. But the Daily Graphic this morning, maternal mortality rate increases. That's on page 13. That definitely is a cause for worry. If the maternal mortality rate is shooting up. So let's take some details of that stories. 875 maternal deaths were recorded in the country last year. The Minister of Health, Kweku Agyeman-Manu, has disclosed. The figure represented an increase, get this, of 12.3% over the 776 recorded in 2020. At the opening of the 2022 National Health Sector Annual Summit, Mr. Agyeman-Manu described the situation as not good enough, indicating that the health sector recorded a mixed state of performance last year as far as its service indicators were concerned. So just to give you a bit of a breakdown, quoting him, our institutional maternal mortality ratio has increased from 109.2 per 100,000 live births to 119.5 per 100,000 live births in 2021, representing 9.4%. Institutional neonatal mortality per 1,000 live births also increased from 7.4 in 2020 to 7.6 in 2021. Furthermore, and to wrap, he said institutional under 5 mortality rate had increased from 9.8 live births in 2020 to 10.7 live births in 2021. So even if you're looking there when it comes to the live birth mortality rate, that has also suffered. I know, Liz, over the years, we've done a lot to contain the situation and to meet the SDGs and others, but this definitely is a setback. What do you think?
Yes, it is a setback and it is a cause for worry. Right. But I want to go beyond the figures to find out what were the causes. Sometimes you realize that we lose lives as a result of negligence. Sometimes it is the mother herself who probably won't be going for antenatal and who would try to wait to the last minute to go to hospital to get treatment just for delivery. Sometimes also it could be a matter of the economy. People probably are not eating well, can't take care of themselves. So I would want to go beyond the figures to find out what are the causes, what are the reasons why it is rising. And if it is something that we can nip in the bud, the earlier we do it, the better. I remember that in my time when I was pregnant, you go for antenatal and they give you some kind of a lecture or some kind of a guide as to what to eat, what to do, what not to do. Are we still doing that? If we are not, then why are we not doing what we were doing before? If it's a matter of them staying at home, do we have the nurses who used to go around to make sure that even if you're pregnant and you can't get to a facility, you have all these community health nurses who go around and look after the pregnant mothers? What is it that we are not doing that is causing it to increase? And with the children as well. I know COVID has had its toll. We blame COVID for almost everything. But indeed, COVID has had a toll on some mothers who probably had underlying conditions and probably got COVID and couldn't get out of it, or got COVID and then it escalated into something else. But are we ready? Are we prepared to deal with it to make sure that it comes down even further than what it was before? That is something that we need to work at.
That definitely is something we need to work at. This breaks my heart because each year we have this, it means more maternal mortality, more lives lost that we could have, in fact, saved. But on that same page, there's another story. 11 illegal miners in Etiwa Forest jailed And 11 persons who are involved in illegal mining in the Etiwa Forest in the eastern region are currently serving prison sentences of between 5 and 15 years. The Koforidua Circuit Court B sentenced them after they were found guilty of engaging in the dig and wash model of illegal mining in the Etiwa Forest Reserve, contrary to the country's mining laws which bar mining in forest reserves. The 11 convicts are among 55 persons who were arrested by officials of the Forestry Commission in 16 different operations in the Etiwa Forest between January and April this year. So they've got these hefty sentences. The illegal miners were arrested at various locations in the Etiwa Forest, including Sejimase, Pameng, Esiakwa, Ahwenease, Joso, Obuoho, Potrase, and Apenaman, the report stated. Heartwarming for me. How do you find it, Liz? I mean, the battle goes on.
Very heartwarming, and the battle is on, yes, and it should continue. And I hope that it's not a set of people that are being targeted. I just hope that it's being done across board. No matter how big you are, no matter how small you are, if you're engaged in illegal mining, you face the rigors of the law. And that's the way it should go. Heartwarming for me, again, because you realize that a lot of the illegal miners are the ones who have caused our waters to go murky.
Right.
So if we are arresting them and this acts as a deterrent to others, then definitely we probably would be saving our waters.
And even as you speak of our waters going murky, I just had to chip this in. It's one of the issues I would have brought up for later. But both the ECG and the Ghana Water Company Limited want to up their tariffs. The ECG over 100%, 140+%. But when it comes to the Ghana Water Company Limited, over 300%. And it's all about the cost of, even processing, the water and all of that. And it ties into what you just mentioned, because the turbidity levels and the other levels, all of those mean more chemicals to use to process our water and more cost, being transferred onto ordinary Ghanaians. What do you make of that? And when you look at our economic situation right now, over 300% of an increase, what do you make of it? How do you think ordinary Ghanaians would cope if the PURC were to go along?
When I heard of it first, my reaction was, have they been able to collect all the debts that are owed them? If they collect all the debts that are owed them, if they are diligent enough to collect all the debts that are owed them, what percentage would it glean of what they need now for the purifying of our waters? If you're upping the tariffs, are we considering those who are below the poverty line? What do they do? How do they get water? I know that we pay some percentage of tax for other issues when it comes to electricity with regards to the vulnerable or the deprived. If it's the same with water, when it comes to that crunch, how are we ensuring that everybody gets water? Because water is life. And so we should make sure that everybody gets water and everybody gets good water. So they have to do their homework. They have to make sure that they have clawed back monies that are owed them. They have to make sure that they are working to ensure that there's very little or no waste of water. You travel sometimes and you see burst pipes, and the pipes have been burst for days on end, and you wonder what is happening, and that is processed water that is just wasting away. So they also have to get their act in order. I'm sure if their act is in order and if all these things are taken into consideration, they would not have to raise tariffs by 300%. It probably will come down. And then people probably, even though we would complain, because no matter the increase, our salaries are not being increased. So it's still the same money that we'll have to be spending. So we'll still complain. But if these things are done, then it will be a little softer on the consumer.
And even as we talk about this, sometimes when we dilate on these issues, past stories come to mind. I recall some months back, maybe late last year or early this year, we did a story in the OT region, and people, you see it in different parts, in the eastern region, in the OT region, in the northern belt, people drinking water that you wouldn't give to your animals. And I'm sorry, I have to make this comparison, but water that you wouldn't give your pet human beings are drinking it because of a lack of access to potable water. You have electricity, and our national grid has still not reached certain, remote parts of the country. You could call them armpits of the country, and in the 21st century. So it becomes a problem sometimes when you also look at how we failed in that regard, isn't it? I mean, with all these resources, should we pay more to get even more? Should we in the urban areas, for example, be willing to sacrifice more so that those in rural areas would get better electricity connection or connectivity? I don't know, but I'm thinking something must be done. 21st century.
I was just going to add that much as I think that Electricity Corporation and Ghana Water should up their game in collecting what is owed them, the fees that have to be paid them for the services that they're providing. Citizens also should be truthful enough. A lot of us probably have arrears and we are not willing to go and pay. We are not even willing to get up and go to the areas where you have to pay. And right now, even water and electricity, you can pay via your phone. I don't know if people want to do that because of the Elevy now. So things are compounding, but we as citizens should make sure that we also play our part. We are responsible enough. And if we have to pay more, if we are being responsible and if the monies are being collected and if everything is being done properly, then we also have to make sure that when electricity company and what Ghana Water collects the monies are used for what they've been collected for and not used for other things.
Well, point made. Let's get into our final story on page 20 of the Daily Graphic newspaper. Keep your drivers in check or face the law. NRSA tells transport operators. So what exactly is the directive? The National Road Safety Authority, that is the NRSA, has advised transport service providers to constantly train and educate their drivers to help curb the flouting of road safety regulations and minimize road accidents. If that is not done, the operators risk being held culpable, just as their drivers, and would be made to also face the law, as stipulated by the National Road Safety Authority Act 2019, that is Act 993. The Acting Director General, National Road Safety Authority, David Osafo-Adonting, said the gross disregard for road safety regulations, coupled with excessive speeding, had become a national security threat, which had to be dealt with to avoid many more casualties on the nation's roads. I couldn't agree more. It's only yesterday, Liz, that we're talking about Sprinter buses and how reckless a lot of them are over speeding, endangering lives, and so much more that is being done. So a bit of vicarious responsibility or liability here. If your driver engages in the act, you would also have to bear some responsibility. Way to go.
Why am I being charged for somebody else's recalcitrance or lawlessness?
You're supposed to give them training and the rest. A lot of them don't. So if your driver is not on top of what he should know, or they're not doing the right things, you'll also be complicit.
So you're talking about commercial drivers or drivers generally? Commercial
drivers.
Okay. And I listened to the interview yesterday, and I listened to people talk about our roads being bad and things like that. And I'm saying that roads don't cause accidents. And I wanted to know the percentage of human error when you're talking about accidents, the percentage of human error.
But just to interject, the roads do sometimes. I mean, bad roads, potholes and the rest, sometimes they are the cause. But mostly we know that it is the human element.
If the road is bad, I believe that if you're careful enough, because you know the road is bad, if you're careful enough, unless it throws your vehicle, or unless your vehicle is not very good, then you don't have a problem. And I believe that a lot of our accidents are caused by human error. Again, when you talk about the vehicles, we are not prepared to take our vehicles for proper servicing. A lot of us do by the roadside checks, and if there's something wrong with it, we think we know how to fix it, and we fix it anyway and anyhow. And when you're driving and that fault recurs and you're moving, it could cause an accident. But I believe that above all, I agree that the drivers must be trained. I have wondered several times, and I've said it in the past, why don't the police go from station to station with breathalyzers, check out the drivers before they set out?
How many of those do we have in the system, the breathalyzers? That's another question.
Good, but if we know that we want to save lives, won't we put our money where our mouth is?
Right.
So we need to make sure that, especially in the very big commercial stations, in the big terminals, you check drivers, especially those going on long distances. And I remember that when we used to live in Bolga and we were coming to Accra, there were 2 drivers on the bus. One driver did not drive us from Bolga to Accra. No, it never happened. One will take a rest, the other one will take the wheel, and it happened like that till you got to Accra safely. And even back then, we were making sure that the roads were safe and that people were taken to their destinations when they tried to use commercial transport. Why are we not doing all these things? We seem to have left the good things, and we are doing all kinds of practices because now everybody wants to get rich quick. And therefore, the faster you go, the quicker you get to your destination, the better. So instead of making 1 trip a day, you want to make 2, 3 because the monies will come in. And that is what happens. And when it happens like that, then you definitely would have accidents on the road because the drivers are rushing to keep up with their boss's commands. And that is something that really needs to be looked at.
It really ought to be looked at. Let's look at the Ghanaian Times newspaper now. At the public hearing of the AG's reports, 10 SHS management officers in trouble. The PSAC recommends, or the PAC recommends, prosecution over procurement irregularities. And pictured there, chairman of the PAC, Dr. James Kluche Aveji. There's also Navy ends search for 8 missing sailors, rescues 16, recovers body after vessel sunk offshore Salt Pond. Sad incident there. Story on page 16. Empower youth to fight money laundering. That's according to Interior Minister Mr. Ambrose Derry. Let's take those 2 stories. 10 SHS management officers in trouble, and the one about the Interior Minister. So let's go to page 17 for starters. And where's that story? Oh, there's also this one. Maybe I'll get to it right afterwards. Yes, so here it is. The Public Accounts Committee of Parliament has recommended the prosecution of some management officers of senior high schools in the Western region for procurement and store irregularities involving uncompetitive procurement, if you like, single sourcing. Others are also to face the Economic and Organized Crime Office for receiving unearned salaries. The directive followed a public hearing on a report of the Auditor General of Pre-University Educational Institutions for the financial year ending December 31, 2018. Just a brief breakdown. Second D Methodist SHS, for example, raised 6 pay vouchers totaling 66,830 cedis. Takwa SHS, the 23 PVs, totaling 48,607 cedis. Archbishop Porter Girls as well. All of these schools mentioned with figures that were problematic, and that is why these management officers are in trouble. Any reflections on this? I enjoy it when the pad goes round because some of these things are exposed and people get to know that these infractions will not go unpunished.
Hopefully, because if you do not hear the outcomes, then you'd question as to whether they really carried it through. It's good for PAC to give those instructions, but after those instructions are given, then what? Are they taken to court? Are they made to refund the monies? Do we have any evidence of monies that have been recovered as a result of PAC's instructions or as a result of what PAC has initiated? If PAC shouldn't just give it and leave it. They should make sure that it's carried through to the end. If it's not, then it won't be a deterrent to anybody. So you get it recurring. But if the people are punished for it, or if they're made to pay back the monies that have been misappropriated,
right,
or misused, then you know that next year you probably will find less, or you might not even find any, because people would know that if you do anything that is untoward, that is not according to the law, with regards to procurement, you'll be dealt with. And that's what should happen. But when they deal with you, if they can recoup the monies, they should, so that whatever was left undone can be done, and so that the school gets back the money that it is owed from the individuals who probably have caused the misappropriation.
We'll revive Commenda Sugar Factory. Alan Tremanting says so. It's a story carried by the GNA and, of course, by the Ghanaian Times newspaper. The government has avowed its commitment to reviving the infamous Commenda Sugar Factory in tandem with its industrialization drive. That's according to Minister for Trade and Industry, Mr. John Allen Kojo-Tremanting, who gave this assurance when he paid a working visit to the Commenda Sugar Factory to assess the progress of work towards reviving the factory. We've expended some $35 million. That was the last tranche that we got to know of. I think Exim Bank in there somewhere. But aren't you tired already of all the rhetoric when it comes to Commenda? I am. I don't know about you, but every day Commenda, former president Commenda, current administration Commenda, and Commenda never sees the light of day. I don't know, but I'm weary already when it comes to Commenda. I don't know what your take is.
So let's hope that there's a political will to ensure that this time it comes to pass. I used to keep tab on the amount of sugar that we import, and I'm like, well, it's causing a lot of problems for us because our own factory is not running. If our factory was running, wouldn't it save us a lot of dollars in importing sugar? But I tend to believe, and this is my assumption and me being mischievous, that probably there's some big man somewhere whose business is importing sugar, who is making money, who uses it to fund political parties. And therefore, when it comes to ensuring that Commenda is up and running, everybody gives lip service, but nobody really goes all out to ensure that it is up and running. I may be wrong, but then sometimes when you listen, like you said, you're tired, and I am also, and that's why I'll be mischievous and think all kinds of things, because if you really want the sugar factory to be running, why isn't it running? So we say one thing and then we do another. We shoot ourselves in the foot. I look at all the area where sugarcane used to be grown for Commenda factory, and I'm looking and I'm like, do we still have all those lands still sitting, not being used for anything? People appropriate those lands onto themselves, and I'm sure that by now the lands have even become smaller. So we should work towards being true to ourselves. All the labor that was sought for Commenda, all the small-scale farmers who used to do sugarcane, they all went out of business because Commenda stopped running. The whole of Commenda kind of ground to a standstill, and people moved out. And you sit and wonder, why is government always paying lip service to its own people instead of making sure that the people are comfortable, have something to do? And if we have something to do, then being mischievous, going out of our way to commit crimes, to steal, to try and get what is not ours quickly.
Right.
Come to a halt because you have something to do. You have work on your hands. You're earning something for yourselves. And we don't look at it that way. We should.
Well, I did promise to take a swipe at that story, Empower Youth to Fight Money Laundering. It's on page 23, but of course, if employment opportunities were very much available and if the youth didn't have to cut all kinds of corners just to make ends meet, I suppose we wouldn't really be here. But let's quickly get into the Daily Dispatch newspaper. Press freedom not under siege in Ghana, Mr. Bwedu Ayebwafo, the National Media Commission boss, says so. Press freedom not under siege in Ghana. Of course, we have the recent Reporters Without Borders report, which paints us in a very negative light. But I also want to cite other things he has said and have you reflect on them. He also says that successive governments have exhibited an unwillingness to make the NMC functionally independent, as enshrined in the 1992 Constitution. Functionally independent, they have shown an unwillingness to do so. Again, he says the commission is the most under-resourced constitutional body in Ghana. How do you reflect on all of this? He says, in one breath, media press freedom is not under siege. But in another breath, governments, successive ones, have exhibited this unwillingness to make them functionally independent, and that they are the most under-resourced body under the 1992 Constitution. Quick reflections. I bring this up because this is also right down your alley.
And when he says functionally independent, I don't know what he means. Functionally independent in what sense? If you are under-resourced and you're being resourced by government and you're complaining about being functionally independent, how are you going to get your resources to run your institution? So I would like to understand what he means by functionally independent. I believe that every institution of government is under-resourced. You prepare a budget, you send the budget to the Ministry of Finance, they do their programs, and you do not get the amounts that you want. No institution in government gets exactly what it has asked for to be able to run efficiently and properly. Excuse me. And so I believe that every institution will complain that it's not being given what it has asked for, it's not being resourced adequately. Are there any other things that NMC can do to make sure that they are functioning and functioning properly? We all know that institutions go for funding. Even our government institutions go for funding from donor agencies, from partners, and we all engage in bilateral partnerships and things like that. Has the NMC tried doing any of that? Has the NMC tried building up itself? With the little resources you have from government, I'm sure if they went asking for help from others, they would receive. Have they done that? If they haven't done that, then why are they not doing it? If they want to be functionally independent, why do they want to wait for government to make them functionally independent? Why don't they work at making themselves functionally independent? Functionally independent in the fact that you're not looking to government only, you're making sure that you're building up structures that will help you function with or without government. You definitely will get what government owes you. But if you need more, are you looking outside to make sure that you can build a strong NMC? I believe that these are things that we can discuss. These are things that we can debate.
Right.
Because if you sit and look to one source only, you might not get anything done. So I believe that the NMC itself should have some inner structures that would ensure that they're liaising with others that will help them to function. And I'm right now, as I'm speaking, I'm looking at the Media Foundation for West Africa. And when they started, they had absolutely nothing. And they're not a government body, but they've been able to build themselves. And right now you realize that they have bilateral relations with all kinds of people who will come in and help them as and when they need it. Why don't they learn from them? I believe that we all become functionally independent if we put our minds to it and if we work at it.
Let's finish, let's wrap with the Daily Dispatch newspaper. I'll run two issues by you, but before that, Abdul Hamid, a judge, CEO of the year. I'm talking about Dr. Abdul Hamid, NPA CEO. There's also Accra Academy to launch a book, Accra Academy. I'm sure a certain Patrick Gomez Otulate will also be excited about that. But two quick issues I want you to address very quickly. There's Professor Okwe, former Speaker of Parliament, insists MPs should not be ministers. I asked, Prof, I saw you in recent times at an event. What happened during your tenure? You had members of Parliament as ministers. You couldn't influence it at the time. So respectfully, sir, my former head of department, these things are much bigger than the talk, the rhetoric. That is my take. And I'll have you share your thoughts, Liz, as well. But there's also Meet Charles Bissu, aspiring MPP General Secretary. Do you remember him? Former Secretary of the Interministerial Committee on Small-Scale Mining. And you remember what happened there? I'm sure you do, Liz. Okay, so there was an investigative piece and one of those exposés. Let's just say he wasn't cast in a very bad light when it comes to corruption-related issues. He's now gunning to be MPP General Secretary. So those two issues, quickly, if you might. Maybe the Professor Okwe one, MPs, ministers.
Yes, the Professor Okwe one, let me say that maybe on hindsight, he has looked at it critically and he has seen that MPs shouldn't be ministers. But we have said from the onset of the 1992 Constitution that if you have ministers, members of parliament as ministers, then you do not have an independent parliament, because if the legislature is mixed with the executive, then they're together. So you have a subset of those who are ministers, those who are part of the executive and part of parliament. And when it comes to promulgating laws, then you probably would have the law skewed towards the party in power or towards the government in power. Okay. And so you would have that dichotomy again when you have ministers as members of parliament as ministers, and there are critical issues in parliament to be discussed. You don't get the ministers coming into parliament because they have their ministerial duties to perform, and so parliament falls short of the contributions of those ministers. And again, you realize that a lot I'm looking for the word to use, but when it comes to members of parliament being ministers, you realize that it's kind of like on a contributory basis towards those who have been more giving towards the party, those who have committed more time and resource and things to making sure that the government came into power, and therefore you have that where it looks like the best of the best have been taken out of parliament, so parliament is still left wanting. And I know that those who are left in parliament will come at me, but indeed when you look at those who are put in positions, you realize that those who probably would make a lot of contribution if they were in parliament 24/7.
Right.
Not saying that those who are there don't make a lot of contribution. I'm only saying that it falls short because you're taking a certain caliber out of parliament, and that you need them as a whole to be able to make sure that parliament functions and functions well. And again, it would augur well for us having the three independent arms of government if you do not have members of parliament as ministers.
Liz, I'd like us to wrap in some 30 seconds. I just want to run these two stories by you and get your take. The Finder newspaper, 5 million Ghana cedis invested into Commonwealth Games preparation. That's according to the sports minister. Year in, year out, we hear huge sums of money being invested. Good, but what are the results we get from them? But maybe even more important, the Daily Statesman newspaper. Elevy raises over 1 million Ghana cedis a day in a specific day. And the GRA has disclosed, and that is the head of project unit at GRA, Isaac Kwabena. He was speaking to us at Joy News that they had sent out letters to the charging entities that every 48 hours they should send some money. And so our first money should have come on Tuesday, but it didn't come. So then we went to Wednesday and we saw some making attempts. But basically, in a single day, on one of those occasions, about 1 million raised for the Elevy and national development, according to Mr. Amwako. Positive strides?
Hopefully, if the monies will be used for what they've been said that they'll be used for, it will be positive. But if it's not used for what they're raising it for, then we still have a lot to desire from the government. But I want to believe that Elevy would be raised and used to raise our standards of living by providing the infrastructure that they claim it will provide.
Okay. Any final thoughts for us as we wrap?
Just one interesting thing talking about about press freedom not under siege, and I'm wondering why anybody would say so, because looking at some of the cases that were brought up in the report, and I'm saying that some because it's not all the cases that have been captured in the report. I'm sure if all the cases against journalists were recorded, would be worse than we are today. So I think that we should not just make blanket statements. We should work at making sure that all the criteria that they looked at, we are working towards improving them and making sure that we come out of this problematic situation where we are being considered that our press freedom is not exactly what it is. We should work at making sure that press freedom is press freedom and the press is free, and everything that pertains to the press working in a very safe and very comfortable environment is provided for us to do our work.
Liz, top of the morning to you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Have a great day. That is media consultant Liz Hayfron-Asare. She has been our guest. Up next, we serve you sports. But don't you forget, when we return with our big stories, we're going to be talking about those tariff increments when it comes to the ECG and the Ghana Water Company Limited, as well as senior high schools not having science laboratories. All those in our big stories. Up next, sports.